In the golden age of Hollywood, perfection wasn't merely expected, it was manufactured. Behind the gleaming Art Deco gates of MGM, Paramount, and Warner Brothers, an army of studio executives, cinematographers, makeup artists, and publicists worked with military precision to construct flawless gods and goddesses for the silver screen. Every wrinkle was powdered away, every shadow carefully lit, every imperfection erased before it could reach the public eye. The stars themselves became willing accomplices in this grand illusion, understanding that their value lay not in their humanity, but in their transcendence of it. But beneath the immaculate surface of old Hollywood glamour existed a far more complex reality. The very system that created these luminous beings also demanded they conceal anything that might shatter the fantasy. Physical disabilities, disfigurements, chronic illnesses, and mental health struggles all were considered liabilities in an industry that trafficked in dreams. Studios maintained tight control over every aspect of a star's public image, manufacturing cover stories, manipulating the press, and employing increasingly sophisticated technical tricks to hide what couldn't be cured or corrected. The stars who carried these secrets paid a steep price for their fame. They endured pain in silence, submitted to experimental treatments, and lived in constant fear of exposure. Some turned to alcohol or prescription drugs to cope with the physical or psychological toll. Others found ingenious ways to work around their limitations, transforming what might have ended lesser careers into testaments of determination and craft. Their struggles were known only to a tight circle of trusted colleagues, a cinematographer here, a sympathetic director there, perhaps a studio fixer assigned to keep the truth from leaking to Hedda Hopper or Luella Parsons. Tonight, we're uncovering 11 old Hollywood icons who carried secret disabilities, and the extraordinary ways they kept those secrets hidden under the glow of Hollywood's brightest lights. Merle Oberon. She was the exotic beauty who smoldered opposite Laurence Olivier in Wuthering Heights, her face a perfect study in porcelain elegance and mysterious allure. Merle Oberon's rise to stardom in the 1930s seemed effortless, a trajectory defined by her striking beauty and ability to embody both sophistication and vulnerability. Born in India and later transforming herself into a British sophisticate under Alexander Korda's guidance, Oberon became one of Hollywood's most photographed faces. She moved between British and American productions with ease, her dark eyes and sculpted features making her the ideal choice for romantic dramas. Films like The Scarlet Pimpernel and The Divorce of Lady X established her as a leading lady of uncommon elegance, but was Wuthering Heights in 1939 that cemented her place in cinema history. But on a London street in 1937, that perfect face nearly ended her career. Oberon was involved in a serious automobile accident that left her with severe facial lacerations and permanent scarring across her cheeks and forehead. For any actress of that era, such visible damage could mean professional death. The studios depended on flawless beauty, and audiences had little patience for scars that broke the fantasy. Oberon faced the terrifying prospect of watching her career evaporate just as she'd reached its apex. Enter Lucien Ballard, the cinematographer who would later become her husband. Ballard understood that conventional lighting would only emphasize Oberon's scars, casting shadows that drew attention to every imperfection. He invented a specialized light setup that would revolutionize Hollywood cinematography, the Obie light. This small, ring-shaped light was positioned directly above or around the camera lens, creating a soft, diffused illumination that flattened the contours of the face and filled in shadows. The effect was subtle but transformative. Oberon's scars seemed to vanish, while her eyes gained an almost ethereal luminosity. Watch her in Wuthering Heights, and you're seeing the Obie at work, every close-up carefully lit to maintain the illusion of perfection. Studios began requesting the technique for other actresses, though few knew its origins in Oberon's private struggle. The accident affected more than just her appearance. Oberon became increasingly controlled about how she was photographed, insisting on specific angles and refusing certain shots. She also concealed another secret, her biracial heritage and true background, creating layers of hidden identity that she maintained until her death. The Obie light preserved her career for another 3 decades, but the psychological cost of maintaining such vigilant secrecy took its toll. She remained beautiful to the end, but behind the perfect lighting, the scars never truly faded, a permanent reminder that Hollywood's perfection was always just one accident away from exposure. Cyd Charisse. When she spun across the screen in those endless, elegant legs, she was the very definition of physical perfection in motion. Cyd Charisse embodied the pinnacle of MGM's glamorous musical era, a dancer whose extraordinary technique and statuesque beauty made her one of the most sought-after partners for both Fred Astaire and Gene Kelly. Her performances in The Bandwagon, Singin' in the Rain, and Silk Stockings showcased a dancer of remarkable control and fluidity, someone who could match the era's greatest male dancer step for step while making it all look effortless. The camera loved her, those impossibly long legs, the perfect turnout, the way she could hold a balance that seemed to defy physics. MGM knew they had something special and built elaborate production numbers around her abilities. What audiences never knew was that Charisse's dancing career existed despite, not because of, her physical condition. As a young child, she had contracted polio, the devastating disease that paralyzed thousands during the early 20th century. The illness left her with significant weakness, and doctors initially told her parents she might never walk normally again. Dance became her rehabilitation, a grueling therapy that slowly rebuilt muscle and taught her body to compensate for lingering deficits. What emerged was not weakness, but a different kind of strength, one built on discipline, control, and an almost superhuman attention to form. MGM's choreographers understood Charisse's limitations without ever acknowledging them publicly. Watch her numbers carefully, and you'll notice a pattern. She rarely performed the explosive jumps or rapid-fire footwork that defined tap's golden age. Instead, her routines emphasized extension, held positions, and fluid transitions, movements that showcased her incredible line and balance while avoiding the kind of percussive, high-impact dancing that might reveal any weakness. Her partners did much of the heavy lifting, literally, supporting her in lifts and spins that created the illusion of effortless flight. The camera favored long, sustained takes that highlighted her control rather than cutting rapidly to hide imperfections. Charisse never spoke publicly about her polio during her career, understanding that any hint of physical limitation could end her position as Hollywood's most desirable dance partner. The studio carefully managed her image, promoting her as the epitome of physical perfection rather than as someone who had overcome significant obstacles. Only later in life did she acknowledge the childhood illness and the years of painful rehabilitation that had made her career possible. She had transformed disability into art, but always at the cost of silence about the true story behind those impossibly beautiful movements. Ida Lupino. She was Hollywood's rare combination of beauty and brains, an actress who refused to be limited by the roles studios assigned her. Ida Lupino carved out a unique space in 1930s and 1940s Hollywood as an actress known for playing strong, often morally complex women. Born into a British theatrical family, she brought intelligence and intensity to roles that might have been merely decorative in other hands. Films like High Sierra and They Drive by Night showcased her ability to convey both vulnerability and steel, making her a favorite of Warner Brothers. But Lupino's ambitions extended beyond acting. She had a sharp mind for storytelling and an increasingly vocal frustration with the limitations placed on women in the industry. In 1934, still early in her Hollywood career, Lupino contracted polio. The disease struck with the sudden ferocity that made it so terrifying, leaving her with weakness on her right side that persisted even after the acute phase passed. For an actress whose physical presence was part of her appeal, this presented a serious obstacle. Lupino adapted by carefully managing how she moved on screen, favoring certain angles, and learning to mask the subtle asymmetry that might be visible to a trained eye. But more significantly, the experience of illness and the frustration of feeling limited pushed her to consider other ways of participating in filmmaking. By the late 1940s, Lupino had begun to write, direct, and produce her own films, an almost unheard of achievement for a woman in that era. She became one of Hollywood's first female directors of the sound era, creating low-budget films that tackled controversial social issues. Her directorial debut, Not Wanted, dealt with unwed motherhood. Her second film, Never Fear, released in 1949, told the story of a dancer stricken with polio, a clear reflection of her own experience. The film depicted the physical and psychological rehabilitation process with unusual authenticity, drawing on Lupino's intimate knowledge of what such an illness actually meant beyond the sanitized version Hollywood usually presented. Lupino never publicized her own polio diagnosis during this period, understanding that revealing physical weakness might undermine her authority as a director in an industry already hostile to women behind the camera. Instead, she channeled her experience into her work, using Never Fear to process her own trauma while maintaining the fiction that it was pure imagination. The film remains a remarkable document of disability in an era when such subjects were rarely treated with honesty. Lupino proved that sometimes the best revenge against limitation is to take control of the story entirely, even if you can never quite tell your own. Harold Lloyd. He dangled from clock towers and scaled skyscrapers, the daredevil comedian whose fearless stunts defined silent film comedy. Harold Lloyd stood alongside Chaplin and Keaton as one of silent cinema's great comedic geniuses, but his specialty was the thrill comedy, spectacular physical stunts that left audiences gasping. His most famous image, hanging from the hands of a clock high above the city streets in Safety Last, from 1923, became one of the most iconic in film history. Lloyd's characters were typically earnest, ambitious young men facing seemingly impossible odds, and his willingness to perform genuinely dangerous stunts gave his comedies an edge that felt thrillingly real. By the early 1920s, he was one of Hollywood's highest-paid stars, rivaling even Chaplin in popularity. But 4 years before Safety Last made him immortal, Lloyd nearly died in an accident that should have ended his career entirely. In August 1919, during a promotional photo session, Lloyd picked up what he believed to be a prop bomb, a papier-mâché sphere filled with smoke powder for atmospheric effect. It was in fact a live explosive. The bomb detonated in his right hand, causing a massive explosion that burned his face, temporarily blinded him, and destroyed his right thumb and index finger. The injuries were catastrophic. Doctors initially feared he would lose his sight permanently and might never work again. Lloyd's recovery took months, but his determination was absolute. He had his hand fitted with a specially designed prosthetic glove that included 2 artificial fingers stitched onto a tight-fitting leather base. In photographs and on film, the glove was virtually invisible. It matched his skin tone and moved with enough flexibility to appear natural in most situations. For the rest of his career, Lloyd choreographed his performances to keep his right hand out of close-up shots whenever possible, favoring his left hand for detailed action and using camera angles that minimized visibility of the prosthetic. The truly remarkable aspect of Lloyd's concealment was how completely he maintained his daredevil image despite the injury. After Safety Last, audiences believed they were watching a completely able-bodied performer risk death in his stunts, never suspecting that the man dangling from that clock had only 8 functioning fingers. Lloyd rarely discussed the accident publicly and never allowed it to become part of his professional identity. Watch his films knowing the truth, and you'll notice the careful staging, the way his right hand stays in his pocket or gloved or just slightly out of focus. He transformed a career-ending injury into a hidden vulnerability that made his subsequent achievements all the more extraordinary, though only he and his closest collaborators knew the full story. Montgomery Clift. He was the beautiful rebel, the method actor whose sensitive intensity revolutionized masculine performance in 1950s Hollywood. Montgomery Clift arrived in Hollywood as a new kind of leading man, introspective, emotionally vulnerable, and impossibly handsome in a way that felt modern and dangerous. His performances in Red River, A Place in the Sun, and From Here to Eternity showcased an actor who brought psychological depth and raw emotional truth to roles that might have been merely conventional in other hands. Clift was part of the vanguard that included Marlon Brando, actors who rejected the stiff formality of earlier generations in favor of something more naturalistic and emotionally naked. His face, angular, almost sculptural, was his fortune, and Hollywood knew it. On the night of May 12, 1956, after leaving a dinner party at Elizabeth Taylor's house, Clift crashed his car into a telephone pole on Benedict Canyon Drive. The accident was catastrophic. His face struck the steering wheel with devastating force, fracturing his jaw in 4 places, breaking his nose, shattering both cheekbones, and causing deep lacerations across his face and mouth. Taylor, who had been following behind him, reached the wreckage first and pulled several of his teeth from his throat to keep him from choking. Clift underwent extensive reconstructive surgery, but the damage changed his appearance permanently. The left side of his face was noticeably different, his jaw misaligned, and he suffered chronic pain that would plague him for the rest of his life. Remarkably, Clift returned to work just weeks later to complete Raintree County, the film he'd been shooting before the accident. The production team employed every trick available to minimize the visible changes, careful lighting that favored his right side, strategic camera angles that avoided profile shots, and editing techniques that kept his close-ups brief. Makeup artists worked overtime to create symmetry where the bone structure had shifted. Publicity downplayed the severity of his injuries, with studio press releases characterizing it as a minor accident, despite the extensive surgery Clift had undergone. The accident marked a dividing line in Clift's career and life. His subsequent performances performances in The Young Lions, Suddenly last summer, and Judgment at Nuremberg showed an actor still capable of brilliance, but something had changed. The chronic pain led to increased dependency on alcohol and prescription drugs, and the psychological trauma of losing his looks, the foundation of his identity and career, deepened his existing demons. Studios continued to film him carefully, but audiences could sense something had shifted. Clift lived only another decade, his later work shadowed by the accident that Hollywood tried so hard to pretend had never really happened. Jean Arthur. Her voice was unforgettable, that slightly breathless, cracked honey sound that made every line feel intimate and real. Jean Arthur became one of the most beloved actresses of the 1930s and 1940s, the quintessential girl next door who could deliver Frank Capra's idealistic dialogue with perfect sincerity. She starred in some of the era's most enduring films: Mr. Deeds Goes to Town, You Can't Take It With You, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, and The More the Merrier. Directors loved working with her because she brought intelligence and warmth to roles that could easily have become saccharine. Her chemistry with leading men from Gary Cooper to James Stewart felt natural and unforced, and audiences adored her for what they perceived as her genuine, unaffected quality. But what the public interpreted as authenticity was actually the product of an actress in a state of near-constant terror. Jean Arthur suffered from severe anxiety and stage fright so debilitating that she frequently vomited between takes and experienced panic attacks on set. The condition was well known to her directors and fellow actors, but carefully concealed from the press, which was told only that Arthur was temperamental or reclusive. She avoided publicity appearances whenever possible, turned down interviews, and developed a reputation as Hollywood's most private star, a characterization that served to explain away behavior that was actually rooted in mental health struggles. Directors like Frank Capra, who worked with her repeatedly, learned to accommodate her condition. Sets were kept small and closed to visitors. Shooting schedules were adjusted to give her breaks when anxiety became overwhelming, and scenes were often filmed in short segments rather than long takes to reduce the pressure. Arthur's performances give no hint of the internal suffering she experienced. Her on-screen presence is relaxed and natural, her delivery effortless. This was a testament both to her craft and to the elaborate support system that enabled her to function despite her disability. Arthur's career ended earlier than it should have, in part because the anxiety that had always plagued her became increasingly difficult to manage. She retreated from Hollywood in the late 1940s, making only sporadic returns, and spent her later years in near-total seclusion. The studios had framed her privacy as eccentricity or artistic temperament, but the reality was that she was suffering from a genuine psychological disability in an era that had neither language nor treatment adequate to address it. She gave audiences joy and hope on screen while enduring private anguish often, a divide that Hollywood's publicity machine worked diligently to ensure would never be bridged. Peter Lorre. Those haunted eyes and that distinctive, slightly wheedling voice made him Hollywood's go-to for sinister charm and European menace. Peter Lorre arrived in Hollywood as an established star, having fled Nazi Germany after his chilling performance as a child murderer in Fritz Lang's M. His physical appearance, soft features, bulging eyes, diminutive stature, made him an unlikely leading man, but Hollywood quickly found a use for his unique presence. He became a character actor of enormous range, capable of playing everything from sympathetic victims to unsettling villains. Films like The Maltese Falcon, Casablanca, and the Mr. Moto series showcased his versatility, and his voice alone became so iconic that it's been imitated by generations of performers. Behind the memorable performances lay a man in constant physical pain. Lorre suffered from chronic stomach problems, including ulcers that caused persistent discomfort and digestive issues. The pain had begun during his years in Europe and worsened throughout his career. To manage it, Lorre turned to morphine, initially prescribed medically, but eventually becoming a dependency that lasted for years. The addiction shaped his life and work, affecting his weight, his energy levels, and his reliability on set. Studios were aware of his struggles, but chose to work around them rather than address them publicly, understanding that his unique talents were too valuable to lose. Lorre's roles often played into his physical frailty rather than against it. His characters were rarely physically imposing. Instead, they relied on cunning, intelligence, or psychological manipulation. Directors learned to shoot him in ways that emphasized his voice and facial expressions rather than expecting physical action. The camera would linger on those expressive eyes, allowing Lorre to convey menace or pathos with minimal movement. In ensemble pieces like Casablanca, he could disappear between scenes to manage his pain without disrupting the production schedule significantly. The chronic nature of Lorre's condition and his dependency on morphine were never discussed in press materials or fan magazines. Instead, the studios cultivated his image as a mysterious European character actor, someone whose exotic background and unusual appearance were part of his appeal. The truth that he was often working through considerable physical distress remained known only to colleagues and close friends. Lorre continued working until his death in 1964, his disability and addiction concealed beneath layers of careful image management and his own professional determination to never let the pain show on screen. Gene Tierney. She was Hollywood's most exquisite brunette, a beauty so perfect that she seemed almost otherworldly, a quality that made her ideal for the mysterious roles that defined her career. Gene Tierney rose to prominence in the 1940s as one of 20th Century Fox's most valuable stars, an actress whose striking looks and cool elegance made her unforgettable in films like Lorre, where she played a woman so beautiful that men remained obsessed with her even after her supposed death, and Leave Her to Heaven, for which she received an Oscar nomination playing a woman whose love becomes pathologically obsessive. Directors like Otto Preminger recognized that Tierney's beauty carried an edge of melancholy, a quality that made her perfect for roles that explored the darker aspects of desire and obsession. She seemed to embody a kind of perfect, untouchable glamour that defined Hollywood at its most sophisticated. But behind the flawless image, Tierney was fighting a battle that would have destroyed her career had it been made public. She suffered from what would later be diagnosed as bipolar disorder, experiencing severe mood episodes that included deep depressions and periods of instability that made working increasingly difficult. In the early 1950s, after a series of personal tragedies, including the birth of a daughter with severe disabilities after Tierney contracted rubella during pregnancy, her mental health deteriorated dramatically. She was institutionalized multiple times and underwent extensive electroconvulsive therapy, receiving an estimated 25 to 27 ECT treatments over several years. The effects of the treatment were devastating. Tierney later reported significant memory loss, including gaps in her recollection of major life events and portions of her career. The procedures left her disoriented and struggling to maintain the level of performance that had made her a star. Throughout this period, Fox's publicity department worked overtime to conceal the truth, issuing statements that attributed her absences to exhaustion, nervous strain, or vague physical ailments. Colleagues on set during her difficult periods were quietly asked to help feed her lines or provide support without drawing attention to her struggles. Tierney's condition was never publicly acknowledged during the height of her career. The studio system's control over information was absolute, and the press corps largely complied with studio requests to avoid certain topics. When Tierney returned to work in films like The Left Hand of God, the press celebrated her comeback from illness without ever specifying what that illness had been. She continued working through the 1950s, but her career never fully recovered its earlier momentum. The ECT treatments had lasting effects, including hearing difficulties that some sources suggest were a side effect of the procedures, adding a physical disability to the psychological one she'd been concealing for years. Only in her 1979 autobiography, Self-Portrait, did Tierney reveal the full extent of her mental health struggles and the brutal treatments she'd endured. By then, she'd been out of the spotlight for years, and the revelation could no longer harm her career. Her story remains one of the most poignant examples of Hollywood's cruelty toward mental illness, how a woman who brought so much beauty to the screen was forced to suffer in silence, her disability carefully hidden behind euphemisms and studio-manufactured explanations, her memory literally erased by treatments meant to cure her. Hedy Lamarr. She was called the most beautiful woman in the world, a face so perfect that it seemed to justify Hollywood's obsession with physical perfection. Hedy Lamarr's career was built almost entirely on her extraordinary beauty. Discovered in Europe and brought to Hollywood by MGM, she became the studio's answer to the question of what sheer physical perfection looked like on screen. Films like Algiers and Samson and Delilah showcased her as an object of desire, and the studio's publicity machine worked tirelessly to maintain the illusion that she was simply a beautiful woman who happened to appear in films, rather than an actress with genuine range and intelligence. What Hollywood rarely acknowledged and actively suppressed was that Lamarr was also a gifted inventor who would eventually hold a patent for frequency-hopping technology that became fundamental to modern wireless communication. But even perfect beauty had its vulnerabilities. Lamarr suffered from partial hearing loss, a condition that began relatively early in her career and worsened over time. The disability was carefully managed through strategic positioning on set. She was often placed where she could see other actors' faces clearly to read lips, and directors learned to avoid complex scenes that relied on subtle audio cues she might miss. Studios also employed increasingly sophisticated lighting techniques to compensate for any asymmetries in her appearance that might result from the way she held her head to maximize her functional hearing. The hearing loss became more significant as Lamarr aged, but by then, Hollywood had moved on from her anyway. Her later life was marked by increasing reclusiveness and a series of cosmetic surgeries that, by many accounts, were poorly executed and altered her famous features dramatically. When her eyesight began to fail in the 1980s, she withdrew almost completely from public view, refusing to be photographed and giving only rare telephone interviews. The woman whose face had been reproduced on millions of movie posters and magazine covers chose invisibility over letting the world see her as anything less than the icon she'd been forced to embody. Lamarr's story illustrates how Hollywood's obsession with physical perfection could be both a blessing and a curse. Her beauty gave her a career, but also trapped her in a narrow definition of her worth. When that beauty inevitably faded, and when the disabilities she'd been concealing became harder to hide, the industry that had celebrated her simply looked away. The studios that had once carefully lit and positioned her to maintain the illusion of perfection had no use for an aging actress with hearing and vision problems. Her intelligence, the patent for frequency-hopping technology, would eventually be recognized as groundbreaking, was dismissed during her career as impossible for someone so beautiful to possess. Another form of concealment imposed from outside rather than chosen from within. Lionel Barrymore. He was Hollywood royalty, literally, a member of the legendary Barrymore acting dynasty and one of the industry's most respected character actors. Lionel Barrymore's career spanned from the silent era through the golden age of sound, encompassing stage, screen, and radio. As the eldest of the famous Barrymore siblings, he brought gravitas and authority to every role, whether playing sympathetic fathers, crusty old doctors, or memorably villainous figures like Mr. Potter in It's a Wonderful Life. MGM particularly valued him in the Dr. Kildare series, where he played the irascible but brilliant Dr. Gillespie opposite Lou Ayres and later Philip Dorn. His presence in a film signaled quality and prestige, and his distinctive voice and commanding screen presence made him invaluable to the studio. But by the late 1930s, Barrymore was in constant pain from severe arthritis that affected his hips and knees. Multiple fractures and degenerative joint disease left him increasingly immobile, and eventually he became unable to walk at all. For most actors, this would have meant retirement, but MGM had invested too much in Barrymore's brand to let him go. Instead, they adapted their entire production approach to accommodate his disability, essentially building films around his limitations rather than writing him out. The solution was ingenious in its simplicity. Scripts were rewritten so that Barrymore's characters were authority figures who operated from behind desks, in bed, or seated in comfortable chairs. As Dr. Gillespie, he became a wheelchair-bound mentor, barking orders and diagnostic insights from a position that made his immobility seem like a character choice rather than a physical necessity. The wheelchair was incorporated into the character's identity, and Barrymore's performances were so commanding that audiences accepted it without question. Camera angles were carefully chosen to shoot him from positions that made his seated posture seem natural and powerful rather than limited. Barrymore also expanded into radio work, where his magnificent voice could shine without any need for physical movement. The Dr. Kildare series transitioned to radio as well, where Barrymore could record his portions seated comfortably in a studio. MGM's accommodation of his disability was unprecedented. They essentially created a new model for how to keep a valuable star working despite physical limitations that would have ended most careers. Barrymore continued working until his death in 1954, never allowing his disability to diminish his authority or presence on screen. The studio's decision to adapt rather than replace him created a template for accessibility in filmmaking long before such considerations became standard. His final performance, appropriately, was as the seated patriarch in a wheelchair, a role that would have been unthinkable for a leading actor in earlier decades, but which Barrymore transformed into a position of strength and dignity. Rita Hayworth. She was sex incarnate, the love goddess, whose sultry beauty and dancing ability made her one of the biggest stars of the 1940s. Rita Hayworth defined Hollywood glamour at its most potent. Her performance in Gilda, particularly the Put the Blame on Mame musical number, became one of cinema's most iconic moments of screen sexuality. Her image adorned pinup posters that traveled with soldiers during World War II, and her marriage to Prince Ali Khan made her an international celebrity beyond her film work. Studios built entire productions around her ability to combine elegance with earthiness, sophistication with raw sensuality. She was, by all accounts, the complete package, beautiful, talented, and possessing that indefinable quality that makes certain stars truly irreplaceable. But beginning in her early 40s, Hayworth began exhibiting troubling symptoms that those around her struggled to understand. She became forgetful, missed cues on set, and displayed increasingly erratic behavior. Studios initially attributed this to temperament or unprofessionalism, then to alcoholism, a more socially acceptable explanation than any alternative. Directors found themselves having to shoot scenes multiple times because Hayworth couldn't remember her lines or her blocking, something unprecedented for an actress known for her professionalism. The press began to report on her unreliability, and her career, which had survived a divorce from Orson Welles and weathered the end of a studio system, began to collapse. What no one recognized was that Hayworth was in the early stages of Alzheimer's disease, an extremely rare diagnosis for someone still in her 40s. The symptoms worsened throughout the 1960s and 1970s, but accurate diagnosis didn't come until 1980, by which point Hayworth had already spent years being blamed for behavior she couldn't control. Her daughter, Princess Yasmin Aga Khan, later became a prominent advocate for Alzheimer's awareness, speaking publicly about how her mother's condition had been misunderstood and how the lack of knowledge about early-onset Alzheimer's had led to years of inappropriate judgment. Studios never acknowledged the possibility of a medical explanation for Hayworth's difficulties during her declining years in film. Instead, the industry narrative positioned her as a faded star who couldn't adapt to changing times and had personal problems that interfered with her work. The sympathy extended to aging male stars, their eccentricities forgiven as artistic temperament, was never offered to Hayworth. She was simply written off as unreliable and difficult, another casualty of the industry's disposability. Hayworth's story became a catalyst for increased awareness about Alzheimer's disease, particularly early-onset cases that strike people in middle age. Her daughter's advocacy work helped bring attention to a condition that was poorly understood and often misdiagnosed. But the damage to Hayworth's reputation during her working years was never fully repaired. The studios that had made millions from her beauty and talents simply walked away when that beauty began to fade and her memory began to fail, never acknowledging that the temperament they'd blamed was actually a devastating disease destroying one of Hollywood's greatest stars. The stories of these 11 stars illuminate a darker truth about Hollywood's golden age, that the perfection audiences worshipped on screen was often purchased at enormous personal cost. Behind every flawlessly lit close-up, every graceful dance number, every commanding performance, there existed a complex reality of pain, disability, and psychological struggle that the studios worked tirelessly to conceal. The very system that created these luminous icons also demanded they hide their humanity, transforming them into untouchable images rather than acknowledging them as whole people facing real challenges. The techniques employed to maintain these illusions were remarkably sophisticated. Cinematographers invented new lighting methods, makeup artists developed innovative concealment techniques, and entire production processes were restructured to accommodate disabilities that could never be publicly acknowledged. Directors learned to frame shots differently, editors cut footage strategically, and publicity departments crafted cover stories that transformed medical crises into vague, exhaustion, or mysterious temperament. The stars themselves became experts at managing their conditions invisibly, learning to work through pain, hide symptoms, and never let the audience see anything that might shatter the fantasy. But the cost of this concealment extended beyond the physical or logistical challenges. These performers lived in constant fear of exposure, understanding that a single photograph, an unguarded moment, or a leaked medical record could end careers that had taken years to build. They isolated themselves from colleagues who might gossip, avoided publicity that might reveal too much, and sometimes turned to alcohol or drugs to manage both the physical pain and the psychological burden of maintaining impossible facades. Mental health struggles were particularly stigmatized, forcing actors like Gene Tierney and Jean Arthur to suffer in silence, while studios explained away their absences with euphemisms that protected the fantasy but abandoned the human being. Today's Hollywood, with all its continuing flaws, operates in a fundamentally different relationship to disability and mental health. Actors now speak openly about conditions that would have destroyed careers in earlier eras. Selma Blair discusses her multiple sclerosis, Daniel Radcliffe has been open about dyspraxia, and Kristen Bell advocates for mental health awareness. Productions are increasingly designed with accessibility in mind from the beginning rather than as elaborate workarounds. The Americans with Disabilities Act has created legal frameworks that earlier generations couldn't imagine, and social media allows performers to control their own narratives rather than leaving that power entirely in studios' hands. Yet the legacy of old Hollywood's secrecy remains visible in the challenges disabled performers still face in an industry that continues to value conventional beauty and able-bodied physicality. Representation has improved, but disabled actors still fight for roles not defined solely by their disabilities, and mental health stigma persists even as conversations become more open. The 11 stars whose stories we've explored tonight remind us that progress is neither linear nor complete, that the work of building a truly inclusive entertainment industry remains ongoing. These stars taught us that glamour and pain often existed side by side, and that true strength sometimes hides behind the brightest lights. They gave us performances that endure precisely because they were forged in struggle, their artistry deepened by the obstacles they faced and overcame in silence. We honor them not by denying the difficulties they faced, but by acknowledging the full truth of their lives, that they were remarkable not just for their talent and beauty, but for their resilience, determination, and the grace with which they carried burdens they could never publicly acknowledge. Their secrets are now part of film history, testaments to both Hollywood's cruelty and these performers' extraordinary strength.